first speaker. You know, this conference, as I said, one of the things that's unique about it this year is this emphasis on forensics and the forensic track. So I thought, well, let's just start out with a presentation that is on the topic. And there's one other little twist to this year. You're going to hear many speakers here today who are sort of what we would in many cases call clients, people that are experts in their field, but are not necessarily surveyors per se, or service providers, but they're experts in their field. And this absolutely describes our next speaker. Dr. John Hahn is not only an expert in fire and explosion forensic investigations. Dr. John Hahn literally writes the book on it. There was a textbook and a couple of books in the field, and I think you're now on your seventh edition. You've written 5 of them, so you are going to get a very special treat from really one of the world's true experts in fire and explosion analysis. Please welcome Dr. John Hahn.
Good morning, everyone. As Jeff just indicated, I'm a criminalist, and that's basically all I've ever done. I actually started my career just a few miles from here almost 41 years ago. Very few people survive that long in my field. It tends to be kind of high stress at times. My original background was physics, and when I discovered criminalistics, didn't involve as much math and a lot more hands-on stuff. I thought this is what I want to do. Of course, when I started, nobody knew what a criminalist was, and it was always getting described as a criminologist, and we're not criminologists. We're the dirty knuckles people that dig out fire scenes and crime scenes in general and do the bloody experiments and things like that. And a large focus of my 29 years in law enforcement forensic labs, excuse me, in the last 12 years in my own practice has been fires and explosions. And so what I want to share with you today is some of the work I've done in cooperation with Tony Grissom from Leica and Craig Fries and Kirk McKenzie and a couple other people that have really generated some great documentation, and we're already seeing its input in fire and explosion investigation. There's the summary boring slides of what I've been involved in, and the most significant thing is since 71 I've been involved primarily in fires and explosions, not only investigations but also research, and we'll touch on that in a little while. About 8 years ago, I started researching a paper on advances in technology and forensic applications, particularly in fire investigation. And I kind of stumbled across the concept of laser scanning. And since then, I've worked with services providing that kind of information or resources from Leica, Rigel, and DeltaSphere for various applications inside fire scenes. And I'll talk more about fire scenes in just a few minutes. I had a major explosion case with a fatality a couple of years ago, and Craig Fries was good enough to respond to my request through my client, and came out and documented the scene. I'll be sharing that with you as well, using the current scan station. And I've worked with Leica equipment, thanks to Tony Grissom, using not only the original scan station, but the C10, in seeing what some of the operational conditions are using this in fire and explosion investigations. In about 2004, I actually had a colleague who worked for the Secret Service. He was a student of mine. And he said, gee, our agency has got one of these, and we'd like to see if it works in fire scenes. And we linked him up with the ATF Fire Research Lab in Maryland. And after one of their burn tests, to a specially constructed building within the facility. He used a rival scanner to see what the capabilities were. And we did discover that, yes, even the technology at the time was useful in capturing the spatial relationships, but one of the shortcomings was it didn't like to work in tight quarters. It doesn't like to, or at least this unit wasn't particularly impressed with small distances such as you might encounter inside a burned room. DeltaSphere came out about that same time. We did a series of live burns in Fallon, Nevada, and I have to explain that as part of my research since 1974, 1975, I've burned or had burned something on the order of 500 or 600 structures, 150 vehicles, various bodies, computers, anything we could set fire to. And people say, "Gee, you must have had a really interesting childhood." I grew up in Chicago, and we were a little sensitive about fires in Chicago. So, no, I never set fires as a kid. I built electron accelerators and irradiated the neighbor's cat, things like that. No fires until I went to work for the Department of Justice. So we tried the then current technology and discovered that it would work, but the reflectivity of charged surfaces was pretty limited with the wavelength and the technology there. So I kept talked about it, saying what a useful thing this was, because fire investigation has changed a lot. Not in terms of its basic concepts. You're still out there with a shovel and digging out a fire scene, but in terms of what you do after you collect the original data has changed a lot. Well, in terms of small cubicle tests, we got Craig Fries out to scan a test cubicle, which is actually only 8 feet by 8 feet in size. We furnished it, we set fire to it. This is what the image looks like to a normal digital camera. And what we discovered was that the laser scan image was not only very clear, but it also showed some patterns that weren't terribly obvious because of the reflectivity of different fire-affected surfaces. Although I don't have a photograph of it, one of the tests I did in connection with the California Association of Criminalists, Tony Grissom came down and we set up several rooms. We burned them, and in one case you can actually see the message on the wall painted in blood before the fire. So there are some really interesting unknowns out there that this kind of scanning can help with documentation. Now, what's changed in terms of fire investigation is that we know more about fire today. We realize that we have to have a much better database to study fires and predict them, to test hypotheses about how this fire occurred, how long it burned, how hot it got, and things like that. And so capturing physical dimensions for fire modeling, whether that modeling is just literally back-of-the-envelope mechanical calculations or spreadsheet manipulations or full-blown computer modeling, you have to do some sort of analysis. And in order to do that, you have to have accurate dimensions of rooms and windows and doors. And in a small room, that might be easily done. But in a room like this, for instance, documenting the size of each of the possible openings in a room that might provide ventilation would be a long, ugly job. When you get into explosions, now you have a debris field. You're not just looking at a single location. You're interested in the trajectories, what things went where, and how far away did they get from where they were used to be. And their distance as well as their direction are important. And then finally, I'll touch on some research we were able to do or demonstrate in terms of explosion dynamics. If you see the scene post-blast, what can you tell about what happened beforehand? Well, this is our traditional documentation. You're out there with a tape measure and a pad of paper, and hoping that by the end of the day you've been able to capture that critical information in terms of room dimensions, heights, surface contours of things like ceilings, very complex ceilings like this, are a particular nightmare, as well as the openings that can provide ventilation. We quickly discovered that reconstruction using computer-generated images allowed us to actually aid in interviews so that you could walk somebody up and say, this is what the building looks like, this is what it did look like before the fire. And so having information, accurate information about this, not just from a still photograph, can help that aspect. Now, one of the things we did, I'll let this play. This is thanks to Tony's work. We did a very complex multiple fire test, and we burned a number of rooms. We crashed an airplane, we crashed a couple of cars, we set fire to it all. And this is the result. You can see the combination of at flyover allowing you to see where everything was, combined with inside scans and things like that, as well as the visual image, has been very useful in capturing critical information, even from a complex scene. And one of the things we discovered is that being able to use the C10, for instance, both inside and outside structures, we did discover that it will work at less than a meter. So if you're inside a small room, you can still get very useful information back. And also combine various elements, interior and outside views, which are very problematic at times. This is one of my scenes that was in suburban Los Angeles, and it used to be two stories, two flat on each side, and one afternoon it went away. And that's, of course, the definition of an explosion, the sudden going away of something that was once there, accompanied by a loud noise. And the issue here was it appeared to be a potential crime scene. Here's my reconstruction from building plans and things like that. LA Sheriff's Office did great overviews and lots of surface as well as aerial photography, but it was still a big process, and it took a long time for a scene like that. Because let me back up for just a second. You see the debris field is enormous. It's about 150 meters in all directions. And capturing all that information, even with days to do it, can be very difficult. This was one of my scenes, a multiple fatality fire and explosion, and in this case the distribution of window glass was the critical element to help establish where the explosion was triggered, because this was gasoline vapors. The gasoline was introduced as a liquid poured through a window, and then an incendiary device thrown in to ignite it. So the distribution of glass fragments was important in reconstructing or confirming the actual point of ignition. This was one of my scenes, and we had some limited aerials from a guy at the top of a 90-foot aerial platform. You can see his shadow there. And this was about 100 meters in two directions. This was Albuquerque, New Mexico, a number of years ago. Middle of the night explosion, fire that took out this building. So we were interested in capturing the debris, the locations of things. One of the disturbing elements of this was that we had at least one fatality, and we ultimately recovered 74 pounds of one individual in 53 separate places. And so documenting that, luckily most of that documentation was done by the forensic pathologists and anthropologists that responded. I only found one piece of our decedent, and that was his jaw that was under this car that had been overlooked in the preliminary search. So being able to get into a scene very quickly and capture that information before more collapse occurs or more damage occurs, weather constrictions and things like that are really important. This is a murder, Salt Lake City, a number of years ago, the infamous Mormon church bomber, and his first victim is actually lying just inside the door. He picked up a package containing a very large pipe bomb. And so the debris right around his office door as well as inside his office was important. There's the debris field outside in the hallway, and there have been shrapnel added, so there's a lot of pieces to document, and I don't know how long it took them to flag each individual piece. The bad news was when I got this to the laboratory, each of those individual pieces was in a separate envelope, and so it took 2 days to sort out the evidence. This is the traditional way of capturing that sort of information. And each of those little dots is actually a circle with a number in it, and that reflects the distribution of debris. Very patiently done over a lot of hours by the Salt Lake City Police Department investigators. The next morning, a vehicle in downtown Salt Lake City explodes. A guy survives, who ultimately turned out to be the bomber himself. By the way, bombings using improvised explosive devices are a very high-risk event. We estimate that 21% of all bomb victims are the bombers. So you don't have really good odds if you're the bomber. In this case, they closed off a main street, and the Postal Service was really mad when the perimeter included their vehicle. And they put up a terrible fuss, and the ATF agents had the guns, and so they kept the vehicle. Ultimately, we were successful in recovering a number of pieces of evidence. Having access to a scanner like we have today would have made that a lot more useful. This is a recent fatal fire scene. I'll show you the scan through of this. In this case, unfortunately, I got the word 3 days after the event. And this is actually the front of a suburban house, and the NTSB had already been there for 3 days digging up my explosion scene and building a beautiful wall of debris in front of the building. And so the scene was compromised, and it wasn't until I got involved that we got scanners out there with Craig Freeze and company, and tried to do some damage control. So this was an issue. We had debris scattered over a very large area. One house really demolished, debris on roofs all the way around. There's across the street, there's debris there, there's debris at that fence. Unfortunately, 3 days into the incident, a lot of this had already been picked up and swept aside. There was no real good documentation done by any public agency, so we were trying to do damage control. The seat of the explosion actually turned out to be the wall switch in this bathroom. You'll notice the extensive fire damage here inside the wall. As it turned out, there was a gas leak that was percolating up under the slab of the house and percolating through the plumbing perforations, gathering in the wall. When the woman in the house went to turn the lights off, the wall exploded and the roof exploded along with the rest of the house. A big piece of the roof fell on the owner of the house out in the field. Out in front of the house. Let me show you what the fly-through looks like, and I'm going to be able to try to pause this to orient you. This, remember, was a large scene. We had houses and fences and this huge debris pile in the front, and Precision Simulations did, I think, about 7 different scan locations, and the result is really, really useful to the investigators, because now we can look at this and say, oh, I recognize the direction the debris went in. There's our bathroom, and all the pieces basically went out from there. The roof was, the attic space was filled with natural gas, so there was a very significant explosion that blew the roof in 4 different directions. And as I said, a big piece of it blown off, went out the front and killed the owner of the house. The 2 women in the house were badly burned. But even 3 days after the event, you can see the debris way out here on rooftops and things like that. And so this gave us as the investigators a really good indication of where we should be looking for the ignition source, and it turned out to tally with the witness's description. And there's the adjoining building and things like that. So even though we had one brief flyover with a fixed camera, this allowed us to explore a lot of the various aspects of this and confirm what had happened. There's the final view. Okay. Then we decided, well, it's, you have to be really quick on your feet if you're going to be there when something explodes, so it's much better if you know something is going to explode ahead of time. So we took part in a series of tests this past spring in Tulare County, which is in the South Valley, and the scene in this case is a disused ambulance with 9 pounds of tannerite. And when you see the damage it does to this, you can see that that's what happens after 9 pounds of tannerite go off. There is debris. The back doors of this ambulance are against that fence, 195 feet from the ambulance itself. So you have a tremendous debris field, which would take a long time to map. Because you're looking for not only what's there, but how far it is from the original place. There's the C-10 in use. There's the windshield fragments about 100 feet away from the vehicle. And having the C-10 there to capture that whole panorama was really useful. And here's what some of the still shots look like. The neat thing here is the reflectivity measure of the laser scan. You can see debris way out here that isn't visible really or detectable in the digital images. And so that's very useful for spotting things that are maybe outside the original perimeter. There's a flyover without a plane. I think this is really, really useful to be able to see where the debris ended up. This is, I think, 4 different scans linked together. There's the flyover, or a tour, I should say, fly through. And gives you some idea of how much damage and where debris went and things like that. What was useful here is we had fixed reference points, and so they scanned the ambulance before, and then using those reference markers, came back and scanned it afterwards, and we can actually see that this entire 10,000-pound vehicle has been lifted and shifted some 6 inches by this cold low explosive material. So, what are we seeing in terms of the usefulness of this technology, especially the ScanSafe, especially the new C-10? Accurate, complete mapping of large scenes, whether they're fires or explosions, interior as well as exterior. Rapid documentation. And most importantly, you can do it while other people are carrying out their preliminary work, their own photography, their own measurements and things like that. You're not slowing things down by saying, well, let's freeze the scene and keep it controlled. Outdoors, day or night, indoors, even at less than a meter, all works. Capturing multiple dimensions, not just what you can see with a tape measure and get somebody to hold the other end of the tape measure, but everything. And that allows you to create a 3-dimensional image. And now the technology is there to take that measurement data and plug it into CAD programs and things like that that will work directly as inputs for fire modeling, computer modeling. Capturing dimensions and trajectories as an advantage, very quickly saving critical investigator time. Comprehensiveness, way beyond what anybody with 2 people with a pad of paper and a tape measure are going to be able to do. Minimized exposure to hazardous environments, whether it's smoke or post-blast residues. You can set the unit up and let it do whatever it's going to do, and then gather the data. Reduction of interruption in business and traffic or problems with domestic scenes, with streets and businesses and things like that. And what's most important to me is I get better data to allow me to do better work in terms of my reconstructions and analysis of the dynamics of not only fires but explosions. And here's most of the people to whom I offer my appreciation for making this possible, and to Jeff for his invitation. Thank you very much.
Yes, we do. So we have now time allocated for questions and answers. Questions from you, answers from John. Well, on this presentation, something like starting the conference off with a bang.
That's what we should have done. Blown something
Nobody's ever used that. So, questions for John.
Yes,
And what we're going to do in terms of this is you need to state your name and the organization that you're with, and then ask the question. So go ahead and take the mic up there. You got a couple of microphones.
Yes, hi John. Bill Hayden, New York Forensic Imaging. Do you recommend a initial scan of the scene as you found it, and then after a excavation and looking through the debris and finding where your point of origin, area of origin is, doing another full scan with the artifacts identified?
Yes, I think that's the best practice. If you're able to do that, that's great, because certainly with the tagging capability in the software, if you find evidence that ultimately turns out to be useful as you're doing your search, then you can flag those locations and capture that information right there rather than add it in the laboratory later. So yes, post examination documentation is really useful, and this makes it a time factor. Normally, by the time you finish the scene, you're 3 days late for the next scene. So having this capability would be a great step forward. And that's what the judges and the juries are expecting. They want to see what you started with, and then, okay, how do you explain this? What's the quality of your data? And that's a really critical factor there.
We have another question in the back. Again, for your name, your organization, please.
Tate Jones, Land Surveying. I'm interested about the safety of your scanning crew. I know you can scan the whole outside without touching it, but at what point can you go into the structure? And then who determines if that structure is safe for people to be in there scanning? Seems like it would be a hazard on the structural side.
Yes, and the hazard assessment is going to be the responsibility of the requesting agency. Typically, the fire service are going to, they're going to control it, and there are times when first responders say, we're not going to go in and do an investigation until the carbon monoxide level drops, or the dust level, or the gas leak, or whatever it is taken care of. The good news is that with a scanner, you can have somebody that's fully kitted out in a hazmat suit go in and set the unit up and walk back out again. And as I understand from the description this morning, that now that C10 can be handled, it can be controlled automatic or remotely. So that's going to improve things even more. But yeah, that's a consideration. In the old days, a lot of us breathed a lot of stuff that we probably shouldn't have, and it's never affected. Structural collapse, of course, is important. You'll notice that in that Rancho Cordova scene, we didn't actually go in the structure. We did all the scans from the outside. We had the advantage, of course, all the exterior walls being blown away. But we were able to get terrific documentation all the way around the perimeter. We never went inside.
Hey John, Mike Hay, good to see you. Albuquerque Police Department, I'm back in the back.
Wait,
There you go. Okay. I heard you, but I couldn't see it.
Question for you, what do you use for your indicators when you're going around tagging items that you're interested in at a scene like this? Do you use flags, do you use indicators with markers on them? What's your preferred method for documentation on that?
Yeah, I prefer the things that EVIPAC used to sell, and now was the Forensic Source, the bright yellow tints, the plastic tints with the numbers on it, because those are easily visible in normal photography.
Okay, I think there was a question over here.
John, how you doing? Herb Keeler, Chicago PD. How you doing? Number one, I hope you're a Sox fan.
Oh, yeah.
All right, good to hear. And number two, the fire department is looking at going to get a scan station C10. What would you say would be their major benefit of acquiring a device?
Being able to capture the best possible data quickly before there's extensive collapse and things like that. Of course, today, in linking up to the safety concerns mentioned earlier, we have had scenes where nobody's allowed in the building, and the engineer comes along and says, "No, it's too unstable. I don't want to let anybody inside the building." They tear the building apart before the investigators get in there. I think that's kind of overstepping things, but the advantage of having the scanner is that you could gather at least some data with minimal risk and extremely high quality data.
Horst Friedson, Climate Action Laboratories. The question is, you showed all these point clouds. Do you also combine these with pictures, like high resolution digital pictures?
Yes, in an actual investigation, had that Rancho Cordova scene, for instance, gone to court, that would have been a critical element. It's combining that scan data with the digital images that were taken at the same time. Absolutely, because that's the only way a jury can understand what you're actually seeing. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, super. Thank you.